Hi guys, this is going to be the last video in our ecology series, and in this one we will be looking at animal behavior. So behavior is everything you do and how you do it. When I say you, that could be you the person or you the organism, or in this case the animal. It's how you respond to all the stimuli in your environment. Everything from how you answer your phone, to how you behave when someone splashes you with water, to how your body reacts when it gets cold outside. All of those things would be considered behavior. And there are two kinds. You can have innate behavior, which is pretty much behavior you're born already knowing. It's something you've inherited. It's kind of instinctive. And it's very automatic. You don't know why you do it, but you just always react in that particular way. It's also very consistent. So if it's something you've been doing from very young, it's probably a trait or a behavior that you will keep on using throughout the duration of your life. The other kind of behavior is called learned behavior. And this isn't really inherited, but it's everything that develops throughout your lifetime. So how you learn how to behave or how to react to certain and different things. Learned behavior tends to be very variable and flexible, and it's going to change just depending on the experience or the environment that you find yourself in. So there are people who make it their life's work to study animal behavior, and we call them animal behavior scientists, or sometimes we call them behavior ecologists, because that's really what they're studying. But why do we care? Why do we care why an animal behaves a certain way, and if that behavior is something that they were instinctively born with, or something that they've developed over time? Well, there is an evolutionary perspective to how we behave and why we behave. Literally, it is part of our phenotype, which means it's part of our DNA. It's ingrained within us. And our behaviors can be acted upon by natural selection. What does this mean? Well, if we react a certain way, sometimes it makes us slightly more successful in the environment in which we find ourselves. And in this case, slightly more successful means that I could probably live longer, and chances are if I live longer, I will be able to reproduce. In reproduction, I will be passing on those behaviors, those traits, those slight advantages to my offspring, which in turn will use those to survive hopefully longer and pass those behaviors on to their offspring. So it just keeps going and going and going. It can lead to the greater fitness of a population. It can allow a population or a species to survive for a longer period of time. And of course, it can allow them to have more reproductive success. So it's just by how you react to something gives you all of these benefits if you're an animal. So to give you an example, chimpanzees that learn how to utilize tools can now eat from a variety of foods instead of just things that they can open with their teeth in their hands. Now that they've developed tool usage, they can crack open nuts that are harder to reach. This gives them a food source that no other group around them has, which means that if something were to happen to the foods that they would normally eat, they already have a built-in advantage. One of the first things that animal behavioral scientists do is that they sit back and they observe the animals of interest, and they kind of take note of the things that they see. So they might hear birds singing or birds displaying feathers or colors or moving in a certain way, and that triggers questions about that behavior. Like, for example, why is that bird singing that particular song? Why does the bird's song change depending on its circumstances? How exactly is he singing? Who is he trying to attract? Who is he trying to get rid of? What is the cause of him exhibiting this ability or this behavior of singing? So that leads to two situations, one which we call proximate causes and the other which we call ultimate causes. So in proximate causes, this is a behavior that results directly because of an environmental stimulus. Something in the environment is causing this animal to react the way it does. So that's the how does he do this? What is he doing kind of questions. Whereas ultimate causes are have more of an evolutionary significance. How does that behavior contribute to this animal's ability to survive and to reproduce? Does it have an adaptive value? So these would be our why questions. Why is he singing? Just for an example. So I just said that some behaviors have what we call evolutionary perspective, meaning that it may or may not give an adaptive advantage to the organism displaying that particular behavior. So innate behaviors, remember, these are the ones that are automatic, that we just kind of do. They're instinctive. You don't really learn how to do them. You just kind of know how to do them. How does that help us in terms of adaptations? Well, it's kind of like everyone in that species is doing that exact same behavior. Everyone's exhibiting the exact same behavior. And it doesn't really matter if the environment changes or not. So the benefit there is because we're all kind of doing the same thing, we can have greater early survival rates. We have reproduction taking place because naturally you just know that you're attracted to this person or this thing that looks kind of like you or is exhibiting certain signs. You naturally know where to find food, or you naturally can respond to things like light and temperature. So all of these would be examples of innate behavior. Whereas our learned behaviors are more modified as we go throughout our life. It changes for the duration of our lifetime. It's modified by experience, if you will. So it's very, very flexible, but it's also very complex, and it's something that you just learn how to do. As time passes, you react differently based on the circumstances or the environment. One of the main kinds of innate behaviors is called fixed action patterns, or FAP. And it's a sequence of behaviors that are essentially unchangeable, and they're usually carried out to completion once you start the pattern. They tend to have an external or sensory stimulus, and it's going to be something that triggers this animal to go into this fixed action pattern. So an example of FAP behavior happens in a type of fish called sicklebacks, and this is a picture of a sickleback right here. The male and female of the species have very distinctive colors. Male sicklebacks tend to be bluish or whitish on their dorsal side, on their top side, whereas on their ventral side or bottom side, they tend to have a red belly. The female sicklebacks, on the other hand, tend to be a grayish-green color on their ventral side, and they have a silver color to their belly, and their under regions tend to be more swollen than the male. And there's an actual reason behind that. So there are two kinds of behaviors that these fish can undergo utilizing fixed action patterns. Now, I did tell you that the male sicklebacks are very territorial. At least I hope I did. So in case I didn't, the male sicklebacks are very territorial. They don't like other fish coming into the little area that they deem their own. But their behavior is going to change depending on what kind of pattern, what kind of action pattern they see from whatever fish is encroaching on their territory. So let's say this is our fish A. This is his little area in the pond that he considers his own. If another male approaches him, what the approaching male tends to do is that red belly that they have is kind of like an attack stimulus. So when this male sees the red belly of another male coming into his area or his region, it is going to prompt him to become more aggressive. And he is going to attack that other male and try to chase him away so that he can maintain that part of the pond for himself, wherever it is he's living. But if a female approaches his territory, he's not going to see a red belly because that's not the fixed action pattern that the females use. What the females use is what we call a swollen belly pattern. And when this male fish sees that silver swollen belly, it lets him know that that female fish is receptive to him courting her and possibly going through the act of reproduction with him. Right? Now, both of these behaviors are not learned. There's something that these fish just naturally do, and they naturally respond to these signs in members of their same species. So we can look at this from the viewpoint of proximate cause and ultimate cause. So remember, our proximate cause questions would be those how questions and what questions, whereas our ultimate cause questions would be the why questions. So from a proximate cause viewpoint, it's going to be the red belly of this intruding male is going to act as a sign stimulus. That sign stimulus is going to cause our fish to be more aggressive to that intruding male. In terms of the ultimate cause, we're really trying to figure out why is he being more aggressive? What's the big deal if some other fish gets into your territory? Well, by chasing that other male stickleback away, our male is decreasing the chance that any eggs laid in his area will be fertilized by another male. He is ensuring that it's his genes that get passed on and not another fish's genes. Another example of fixed action patterns is exhibited by a digger wasp, also known as a sphinx wasp. Now, what these guys do is when this is their little burrow or hole where they live in, and when they catch a prey item, they paralyze it and they drag it back to their hole, and they will then consume the prey item. But before they will bring the prey item into their burrow, they leave it outside of the burrow, and they go inside the burrow and they kind of inspect. I don't know why they do this. It's almost like they're making sure that, everything's left exactly how it was. And then once they don't find an issue, they will come back out and grab onto their prey item and pull them into the burrow where they'll then consume them. The fixed action is they must drop their prey item, inspect their burrow, come back out and get the prey item. So if this prey item is moved just a few inches away from where this wasp put it down, the wasp will find it, it will drag it back to the entrance of the burrow, but they must go back in without the prey item and inspect again. It doesn't matter how many times the prey item is moved. Every time the wasp finds it and brings it back, it goes back into its burrow before bringing its food in, inspects it, and then comes back out. It never seems to realize that it's inspected the burrow several times over. So that would be another example of fixed action pattern. Another response that seems to be innate in nature is the response to supernormal stimuli. So a supernormal stimulus is just a really large stimulus, and the response that tends to be seen among animals is a even bigger response to its normal stimulus on steroids, for example. So remember we talked about the stickleback fish a couple slides ago, and I told you that if a male saw another male with a red belly, it would aggressively attack that male and try to run it off. Experiments were done where boats were the bottom part of the boat, the part that's in the actual water, were painted red. So to a stickleback, that, it's the whole red belly syndrome, those fish aggressively, even more aggressively attacked that boat than they do any just regular stickleback fish. And it's because of that supernormal stimulus. The stimulus is so much larger that the fish responds even more heavily to the boat than to an actual fish. Another example of this response occurs in herring gulls, which would be what this bird right here is. Now the parents have a red spot on their beak, and when they gather food for their chicks, they will only open their beaks in response to their chicks pecking on that red spot. So an experiment again was done where if you look at this graph right here, it shows you they kind of just looked at the pecking rate of these chicks on an actual bird, a standard model, just the bill that has that red spot, and then a knitting needle. It says stick, but it's supposed to represent a knitting needle that was completely painted red except for 3 little areas that they painted white. And if you look at it, for the most part, the natural head, the standard model, and the bill only had about the same pecking rate. But when those baby chicks saw this knitting needle, which was for the most part completely red, they pecked at the needle way more than they did at anything that resembled their actual parent. So again, this is just because of supernormal response. The stimuli, in this case a knitting needle, doesn't even look like the actual animal but the chicks aren't looking for mom or dad. They're looking for the red spot. They have figured, innately, they know that if they peck at the red spot, they get food. So the bigger the red spot is, the more they peck at it. So that leads us to the question, does lipstick create a supernormal stimulus in humans? And a couple of studies have been done on this, and for the most part, the data comes back to say yes, especially females versus males. Males of our species are attracted to the lips of a female. And when women wear something on their lips, and that something could be lipstick or even like a shiny lip gloss, anything that enhances their natural lip, men are more attracted. Ironically enough, or maybe understandingly enough, when the color red was tested out, the male of our species took way more notice to women wearing red lipstick than anything else. So, supernormal stimulus. So still on the topic of innate behaviors, we have directed movements that fall under this category of innate behavior. We naturally know how to do this. And there are two of them. The first one is called taxis, and the second one is called kinesis. So taxis is the ability to change direction. It tends to be an automatic movement, and it's normally towards something positive, so what we call positive taxis, or away from something negative, also known as a negative taxis. We can replace the words positive taxis and negative taxis with positive stimulus and negative stimulus. So we tend to move towards things that are positively stimulating us and away from things that are negatively stimulating us. Examples would be phototaxis and chemotaxis. So photo being light and chemo being some kind of chemical. So an example of taxis would be looking at any kind of river fish or stream fish, like trout, for example, which is what we're looking at here in this diagram. Trout tend to swim in the direction of the current. So they actually swim into the current instead of swimming with the current. So this is what we call positive rheotaxis, rheo being current. The reason that the fish would do this is because the current is going to be bringing their food towards them. So if they're facing the direction the current's flowing, the chances of them getting food is greatly increased. So that would be an example of positive taxis. Whereas kinesis is a change in the rate of movement in response to a stimuli. So how much are you moving around? And a good example would be pill bugs, also known as sow bugs, and I think in Texas you call them roly-polies. But that's what this picture is supposed to represent right here. Pill bugs tend to be more active in dry areas. So the drier the area, the more they move around. And they tend to be less active in more humid areas or moister areas, if you want to think of it like that. So it's not so much that they're moving away necessarily, as they're just moving around more. So for the most part, all of the innate behaviors that we talked about so far are fairly simple, and they make a lot of sense. But there are some complex ones. One of the most being migration. So migration is just when animals change location, and sometimes it takes a long time for them to do that because their new location is hundreds or even thousands of miles away. One of the behaviors that we will see in animals that migrate, especially in birds, is as migration approaches, they get restless, and it's called migratory restlessness. So they seem to want to leave, and we see this especially in birds that are held in captivity or are being raised in captivity or kept in captivity because, they're sick or you're trying to make them better or something. It's like they really want to leave the area because they know it's time for them to migrate. It's time for them to leave. Migration is done through navigation utilizing the sun, the stars, and the Earth's magnetic fields. How exactly they do it is still a pretty big mystery, but lots of animals migrate. The most common ones being the monarch butterflies, which go all the way from one end of Canada all the way down to Mexico, which when you consider that they're a little bitty butterfly, that's a big deal. Then we have birds like the bobolink that go from the northern parts of North America all the way down to the southern parts of South America. And then the golden plover, which is another kind of bird, And they also go from the northernmost parts of North America all the way down to the southeastern parts of South America. So these are some pretty big distances that these organisms are traveling. And they do it by the thousands. If you look at these pictures, this would be the sandpiper here, these would be monarch butterflies here. These are not exaggerations. It's literally thousands and thousands of these animals moving all as one unit. Another innate behavior, but this one is also coupled with a little bit of learning behavior, is called imprinting. And if you are a fan of the Twilight series, and that in the fourth book, I can never remember the names of the actual books, but in the fourth book where they talked about Jacob imprinting on Bella's, or whatever her name was, his daughter, it's kind of like that, but not exactly. So imprinting is learning to form a social attachment at a very specific but critical time period in the life of an animal. And it's normally done when that animal is really young. And it goes into both categories because it does have some innate competence, but it also has a lot of learning competence. In the early 1930s, a lot of experimentation was done using the basis of imprinting, using geese as our test subject. And they came with the conclusion that a lot of waterfowl, geese in particular, have no innate recognition of mother, like who their mom is. What they actually respond to and identify with is the very first object they encounter that has certain key characteristics. So like I said, in the 1930s, there was this scientist, and actually this is him here. His name is Konrad Lorenz, I think, if my memory serves me right. And these are his geese. These geese imprinted on Lorenz because he was the first person that these baby geese saw, or these goslings saw, when they hatched. And because they imprinted on him, they're always with him. As far as these goslings are concerned, this man is their quote-unquote mother. One of the main things with imprinting, especially when it comes to waterfowl, is not so much what the organism that they first notice looks like, but the fact that the organism moves away from them. So literally, they saw him, he walked away, and they all followed him. That's imprinting. So if we look at it from a proximate cause, remember, this is going to develop really, really early at a very critical developmental stage. And normally what happens, since geese are waterfowl, and when I say waterfowl, I mean any bird that lives in the water, one of the first things that the parents will do once everyone's hatched and accounted for is they will try to get those baby birds into the water. So that's what these goslings identify with, the fact that at a very young period of time, their mother or father gets into the water and starts moving, swimming away from them, but still calling to them in an attempt to coax them into the water. In terms of ultimate cause, on average, geese that follow an imprint on their mother tend to receive more care and learn more necessary skills than the ones that don't follow their mother. So their chances of survival are greatly increased. So literally through years and years and years of adaptive change and this particular behavior being placed in the genome, it's something that they do. It is innately part of them, but they still do look for certain classic signs. So the fact that it's a part of them, it's something that's been happening for a long time, that's where the innate comes in. But the fact that they look for certain key behaviors, like mom getting into the water, swimming away from me, and calling out to me, that's where the learning part comes in. The fact that a lot of animals imprint has helped us to save so many species, it's not even funny. A lot of conservation biologists take advantage of this imprinting ability, and we use it to teach some of the younger animals that have been either abandoned or badly hurt or their parents have been killed. We use them to teach them how to do all the things that they need to do. When we looked at population ecology, we talked about the whooping crane and the fact that it is recovering from endangerment, and the fact that their population is growing exponentially because of the conservation efforts of humans. But because there are not a whole lot of adult cranes around, it means that the baby cranes don't have anyone to teach them how to be baby cranes. So we're using the fact that they tend to imprint to our benefit by having them imprint on humans and then using that human to kind of stand in as their mom and teach them things like how to feed and how to migrate and stuff like that. It's really kind of cool when you think about it. So a couple slides ago I mentioned the term critical period. The critical period is a very sensitive phase during which maximum or ultimate or optimum imprinting takes place. And nearly every living thing has a critical period. Literally, some behavior must be learned during a critical period, and if it's not learned at that point in time, it is never learned. A good example is the cuckoo bird. If you're not familiar with cuckoos, they're what we call brood parasites. Their parents lay their eggs in an unsuspecting bird's nest, and the cuckoo actually hatches before the other eggs. So what it does, because it's a way bigger bird, first of all, is it's going to push those eggs out of the nest until it's the only, chick in the nest. So those parents spend a long time just feeding and growing this parasite that's not even theirs, and they never tend to notice. But what the interesting thing is, cuckoo birds don't actually know their own song. Each bird has a specific song to its species. And while each bird is born with the ability to sing, the question is, what will they sing? Okay, and why will they sing that song? And that is learnt based on what they hear their parents sing. Now, since the cuckoo has surrogate parents, then whatever songs the parent sings, this cuckoo will sing. It never learns its own song because it doesn't, within its critical period, it's learning a different species song. So far, all we've talked about, for the most part, were the innate behaviors. Now we're going to talk about the learned behaviors. So the main concept of learned behavior is called associative learning. And associative learning is where you learn to associate a stimulus with a consequence. And we all kind of go through this. When you're little and you touch the light switch, your mom might swat you on your hand and tell you not to do that. And you learn that if you touch the light switch or you touch the electrical socket or whatever, that you'll get a swat on your hand, and you don't like being swatted on your hand, so you don't touch the electrical socket. That's associative learning. It comes in two ways, for lack of a better term, what we call operant conditioning and classical conditioning. Operant conditioning is trial and error learning. So you do it and something happens, and you do it again and something happens, and you do it again and something happens, and eventually you learn how to behave based on trial and error. It's associated with either rewards or punishments. We tend to repeat behaviors that give us rewards, and most of us tend not to repeat behaviors that result in punishments. So an example of that would be like learning what to eat. If you look at this picture up here, we have a blue jay, and it looks like our blue jay has caught a butterfly. Well, from the looks of it, this looks like a monarch butterfly, which would make this blue jay really, really sick. So over time, after he does it a couple of times, he'll learn to leave the monarch butterflies alone because they make him sick. The other way that we can go through associative learning is through what we call classical conditioning. And you've probably heard the term Pavlovian conditioning, or Pavlov's dogs. You might have heard it that way as well. And it's associating a neutral stimulus with a significant stimulus. In a couple of slides, I'll explain exactly what that means. So here's an example of some of the experiments done to further the study of operant conditioning. And in this particular setup, we have what's called a Skinner box, and you have a little mouse, and inside of that box is a lever. So when the mouse pushes on the lever, it's going to release a pellet, and the pellet gets drawn into his actual cage. So over time, the mouse learns that if I push on the lever, I get a treat. If I push on the lever, I get a treat. So that would be operant conditioning, where you're getting rewarded for your behavior. The reward in this case would be the food that the mouse is getting. The behavior would be him pushing on the lever. So the classic example for classical conditioning is Pavlov's dogs. What happened in this experiment is the scientist, Pavlov, had some dogs, and he would feed the dogs and ring a bell, and it was done simultaneously. So the dogs got food, and this bell was rung. Well, one of the reflex behaviors of dogs, and to be honest, of any organism really, is when it's presented with a food source, the mouth of the animal starts to salivate, so they start producing lots of saliva. So over and over again, the food was put down and a bell was rung. The food was put down and a bell was rung. And constantly the reflex was always for the dogs to produce saliva. Over time, the food stimulus was removed and all that was left was the bell. But every time those dogs heard that bell, they would still produce saliva because they had started associating the bell with getting food. And even though they weren't getting food, their body still reacted like if they were getting food. Another kind of learned behavior is called habituation, and it's the loss of response to a stimulus. So this is what we call the cry wolf effect. Everyone's probably heard of that story of the little boy who cried wolf, and everyone would come running and there would never be a wolf. And then one day he cried wolf and no one came running and there really was a wolf and he died. Real sad. Don't cry wolf. Anyway, so it's a decrease in response to repeated occurrences of a stimulus. What this actually helps the animal to do is animals learn how to disregard unimportant stimuli. So for example, if you live in the forest, if every time a leaf or a branch or a twig fell, you'd get jumpy, then you'd be jumping all the time. But over time and through habituation, animals that live in the forest learn not to be afraid of falling leaves or twigs or whatever. It doesn't trigger a fear response in the animal anymore. So it's called habituation or the cry wolf effect. Another kind of learned behavior is the art of problem solving. Now, not every single animal can reason or solve problems, but there are some who can. Some animals are capable of using tools like chimpanzees and different kinds of primates and sea otters. Others are capable of solving problems and figuring out how to get something, based on their environment. For example, types of birds like crows, and again, primates. Many animals exhibit what we call social behaviors. We call them social behaviors because we only see them when individuals have to interact with each other. They are normally a direct development due to evolutionary adaptations. So examples of these can be things like communication between animals or language between animals, antagonism, dominance and hierarchy, cooperation, altruistic behaviors, and we'll step through what some of these are in a second. So when we think of language, it's not a working language the way humans have, but it's more of a behavior. So a good example of language between animals would be in the case of honeybee communication. Honeybees dance. Specifically, it's called the waggle dance. Not the wiggle. It's not Jason Derulo. It's the waggle. And if someone reminds me in class tomorrow or the next time I see you, I will play a video of what that waggle dance looks like. But it's the way that honeybees communicate with each other. So they dance in order to communicate the location of a food source. They also dance for various other reasons, but the main dance is all about telling other bees in the hive where they can find food. It's actually kind of cool. I think I say that a lot. Other animals, especially birds and insects, communicate by song. Bird songs are used to identify different species. They're used for mating rituals, and it's a mixture of learned and innate. It's kind of like when I talked about the cuckoo bird earlier on. All birds have the ability to sing, but which song they sing depends on the socialization by their parents, what song they hear during their critical period when they're imprinting. Insect song, also for mating rituals, it tends to be more innate and it's more genetically controlled than it is learned. Another social behavior is called agonistic behaviors, and these tend to be either threatening rituals or submissive rituals. They're normally really symbolic. It looks like one animal is being injured, but most times no harm is done to either animal. And it's used to settle disputes of things like territory and competitors for like mates or space and stuff like that. A classic example of this kind of behavior we see in a lot of I couldn't think of the word, but we've seen a lot of horned animals where they tend to headbutt or to wrestle almost with their horns, and it really does look like they're hurting each other, but they're not. And you can see this in terms of dominance, like who's going to be the leader of the pack or who gets to mate with the females, stuff like that. In terms of submissive rituals, it's one of the ways that a female will let a male member of her species know that she is receptive to being courted and for the process of reproduction. Okay, so dominance hierarchy is all about the social order within a group or a population. It's pretty much pecking order. And we'll fight or pretend to fight to establish who is going to be the alpha male and sometimes the alpha female. Cooperation, just like the name suggests, is working together to achieve a common goal. We see this a lot in packed animals. For example, African dogs, they are predators, they are carnivores, but they're really small, especially as compared to like lions and leopards and cheetahs. So their power is within their numbers. The entire family or the entire pack will work together to bring down a prey item that's normally way bigger than they are individually. So that would be an example of cooperation. Another example happens in some kinds of birds that eat fish, but like dolphins and whales do this as well, where they will herd and trap fish, within a net of either bubbles or their bodies, and that allows everyone to get an equal share of food. When it comes to altruistic behavior, think of it as sacrificing yourself for the good of the family. So altruistic behavior normally results in reduced fitness for the individual animal, but it increases the fitness of all the other members of that family or species or population. Altruistic behavior also leads to what we call kin selection, where the animals that benefit the most from this altruistic behavior tends to be close relatives, and they tend to pass those genes on to the next generation. So bumblebees do this. Hopefully the workers within a bumblebee nest are actually females, and they have stingers attached to their abdomen. And those stingers are curved. They have like a hook on the bottom part of them. So when they get into your skin and the bee flies away, because the stinger won't come out smoothly, a large portion of its abdomen actually remains attached to that stinger, normally enough to kill the bee. But bees will sting anything that's trying to invade the nest not repeatedly, but many bees will sting whatever's trying to invade the nest in an effort to protect their queen and the eggs and their honey and all of that without any thought for themselves. Meerkats and prairie dogs are other kinds of animals that exhibit altruistic behavior. There's normally one or two animals that are constantly on guard, and their job is to look out for predators or anything that might affect the family group and possibly even drive those things away. So they literally are willing to sacrifice their own life for the benefit of their family or their general population. Some types of communication happen without words or without flashy, colors or rituals or anything like that. They happen through chemicals, and those chemicals are called pheromones. So a pheromone is a chemical signal that stimulates a response from another individual. And there are normally two kinds of pheromones. There are alarm pheromones, which suggest that something's wrong and you need to take action. And there are sex pheromones, which suggest that one member of the species is ready to be courted. Right, so if you've watched any kind of National Geographic or Animal Planet or anything like that, then marking of territory is something that's showcased a lot, where some of these big cats will scent the area that they consider their own, and they're doing that through pheromones. Female lions will also scent or release sex pheromones to lure in the male. What else? Female mosquitoes use carbon dioxide to locate victims. So if you breathe out a lot, you tend to get bitten more. It's interesting. So as mentioned before, when we start thinking of the role or the impact of behavior on natural selection and through natural selection on evolution, we have to remember that natural selection is going to favor behaviors that increase the survival and the reproductive success of those particular animals. So if you think about some of the things that animals exert energy on, it'll be things like finding food. Okay, so foraging, looking for food, mate selection. Those are two of the things that probably utilize the most energy in terms of what an animal is putting out on a day-to-day basis. So when it comes to foraging behavior, you kind of have to balance it between, okay, what are the benefits that I'm getting from what I'm eating versus the cost of finding that food? So how much energy am I exerting versus how much energy is that food giving me back in return? In terms of mate selection, unfortunately, animals tend to be promiscuous. They don't really form strong bonds. Now, a few of them do, but generally speaking, animals just kind of mate with whoever seems to be the best choice at that point in time. Some relationships can be monogamous, where you only have one male that's mated with one female, and they kind of share that bond for either a really long time or life. But most of the relationships tend to be polygamous, where you have an individual of one sex, normally the male, mating with several of the other. So it can be polygyny, where it's one male with many females, or it can be polyandry, where it's one female with many males. You see both. But one of the things I need you to realize is that anytime an organism can reserve energy from anything else other than the reproductive process, they are increasing their fitness and the chances that their genes will be passed on. That's pretty much the whole point. Live long enough, survive long enough to pass on those worthy genes to an offspring. Okay, so any energy or anything that you can do that will allow you to get to the point where you are producing children is a good thing. So many organisms go through complex mating rituals, and it's not just them wasting time. There's actually a reason behind it. Natural selection tends to favor mating behavior that maximizes the quantity or quality of mating partners. So courtship behavior, all these patterns and hoops and all those things that these animals have to jump through in order to get a mate, is that animal's way of testing to see if you really are a worthy father or mother for, normally it's father, for the next generation. Are you strong enough? Are you smart enough? Are you agile enough? Do you bring everything to the table that my species needs to be successful? So this picture shows an example of some of the rituals for the mating of fruit flies. And all of these things have to take place. All three steps have to happen in that order before that female, which is, hold on, let me get my laser. This one. So pointed abdomen would be our females. Sorry, so like I was saying, all of these things have to happen before that female will allow that male to mate with her. All of these steps lets that female fruit fly know that this male is worthy. He is all the things that she needs in terms of genes to make successful offspring. All right, so hopefully this was pretty clear, and you know, the usual, make sure you note any questions that you need to ask me, and we'll address those in class. From this point on, you can start studying for your test, which will be coming up pretty soon, over ecology. So, see you guys soon. Bye.